How would you like a job that had no pay, long hours, and enormous responsibility? Well, that was the case for the first members of the Western Australian Parliament when self-government was granted in 1890. The fact that a candidate also had to pay a deposit of £20 just to get their name on the ballot meant that most people could not even contemplate putting themselves forward as a candidate. And it was on this site, behind the Perth Town Hall, that the Legislative Assembly first met in 1890. It was not until 10 years later, in 1900, that members were paid an allowance of £200 per year. It is interesting to note that Sir John Forrest, our first Premier, stood uncontested in his seat of Bunbury during his entire career in state politics. No one could afford to leave their job. Lack of pay and the high deposit were obstacles in the early days preventing people from considering a career in politics. Now the obstacles are very different. Lack of a home-work-life balance, especially for those with young families, increased scrutiny of the member and their family, and the ever-increasing use of social media, intruding into the personal lives of public figures. And of course there is the cost of a modern political campaign, which can be upwards of $40,000 for a lower house seat, a cost that the candidate is responsible for. And yet there is no shortage of people willing to put themselves forward as a candidate for Parliament. In this episode, we will talk to present and former members of the West Australian Parliament, hear some of their personal stories, and discover their reasons behind their desire to serve. At the 2017 Western Australian state election, many new members were elected to Parliament. Cassie Rowe, Yaz Mubarakai and Zach Kirkup were three new members with very diverse backgrounds and experiences.
My father was a Member of Parliament in Victoria, and so I suppose the fabric of our family life and upbringing for my sister Samantha, who's also a Member of Parliament, was very much deeply connected to politics and Labor politics. There was never a dull moment around the kitchen table. Why I want to run and become a Member of Parliament is around equality and that pursuit of equality, economic equality, gender equality. Those are the things that really drive me.
I've been part of the community as a local postmaster, and that was my first point of engagement, being a postmaster through the post office, speaking to various different families about various different issues. And I don't know why, but the post office and the postmaster seems to be that person that people come to talk to. Being a migrant myself, I thought it would be a great opportunity to integrate into the community and sort of give something back to the community and work for them. And so I put my hand up and I got elected by the people.
I don't know if there's a traditional journey for any Member of Parliament these days, but I went to a high school in Midland. Politics was always something I was really interested in. I was interested more in marine biology as a young boy. My grandmother, though, told me that I was, in my primary school years, that I was far too fat and would get eaten by sharks, so I should choose something different. And politics is something that I was always drawn to. I went on after high school to work volunteered for the then Leader of the Opposition up here in Parliament House. Went and worked for a senator after that. Was asked to join the Liberal Party as a campaign officer. Went on to become the youngest Deputy State Director of the Liberal Party. Went into the private sector for a couple of years and then put my hat in the ring for pre-selection for the District of Dawesville. So it's probably not a particularly traditional path, but it's always something that I've always wanted to do.
Very few members leave Parliament of their own choice. The Honourable Ken Travers retired from the Legislative Council before the 2017 state election. Former President of the Legislative Council, the Honourable Barry House, also retired in 2017. However, the Honourable Albert Jacob, the former Minister and former member for Ocean Reef, was one of his party's casualties at that election.
I'd always set myself a goal of probably doing 12 to 16 years in the Parliament. Certain things happened. I then ended up becoming a shadow minister that gave me greater responsibility. And so that meant I end up at the end of 16 years running again for another term. During that time I also had, as it turned out, there was nothing to be worried about but a little bit of a health scare. That made me sit back and start to reflect on, is this what I wanted to do for the rest of my life? Was I still enjoying it as much? Are there other people that could do the job as well? Because I, by that stage, had a very good opportunity to have that privileged position. So I eventually reached that point where I realised that's not what I want to do.
I always saw Parliament as a macro version of high school. You know, when you go into high school, you're a year 7. You're the youngest in the class, and you have everyone from year 7s up to year 12s. Year 12s don't generally talk to year 7s. Year 12s are all the school captains, and they get to call the shots. So again, I think that was a benefit of being younger. It's been a very full-on 11 years for me and my family. We've been pursuing this goal of public office solidly since May 2006. So I'm taking a bit of time with my wife, with my children. And a big part of the reason why I'm trying to take time now is whatever comes around the corner, I tend to throw myself into it 100%.
Re-elected in 2017, the Honourable Alison Zamon is a rarity amongst parliamentarians because she successfully returned as a Member of Parliament, having lost her seat in 2013.
Parliament is not going to be appealing for a lot of people. The hours are long. You're under public scrutiny. There's very little public acclamation for what it is that you do. And so I think that a lot of people, particularly people who are close to it, recognise what's involved and don't find it particularly appealing. And I get that, because you can earn more money. Many people can earn more money outside of Parliament, and you don't get the abuse, and you don't get the public scrutiny, and you do get work-life balance.
When Josie Farrow was born in 1947, Aboriginal people were not counted in the census or allowed to vote. Now, as the member for Kimberley since 2013, she shares her unique story.
I remember my grandparents who brought me up, very traditional Aboriginal people, and I was raised by my grandmother. That's my mum's mother, and I was raised out in the bush. My mother had a son before me who was born, but because of the policies that existed, my mother couldn't keep her baby, my brother. He was born before me. So he was taken away under those laws. As a child of 9 years of age, I was placed on the back of a truck with a lot of other young Aboriginal children, and we were driven about at that time it was around about 300 miles away from my family, and we didn't know where we were going. We didn't know what was happening to us, and this was in the middle of winter, our very cold weather that we have up in the Kimberley. We were herded as children and taken into the settlement or mission, as it was then, called Mullabulla. I didn't really stop and think about Parliament or government or the Protector for Aborigines or whoever. I just enjoyed life working on a cattle station.
One battle that many parliamentarians face is the low esteem in which politicians are generally held. The question of how to deal with this, and some of the misconceptions about Parliament and parliamentarians, was put to some present and former members of the Western Australian Parliament.
Social media has made this much, much worse, where people think they can just throw rocks. The keyboard warriors, the trolls, when you're an MP, you are trolled permanently. And the further up you go, the worse the trolling gets.
I've seen the way that social media has dramatically changed the landscape in which we need to be able to respond. I just want to say some social media is fantastic, the capacity to be able to reach out beyond traditional media forums and to talk to people directly and to be able to get your position forward. That's really fantastic. And it is a double-edged sword. The flip side of it is that you do have people who are quite cowardly and also spectacularly misinformed, who feel somehow entitled to be able to just engage in wholesale abuse.
One major misconception is that all we do is argue and fight in Parliament. Now, of course, if you come at 2 o'clock on a parliamentary day, that is reconfirmed because that's question time. And of course, that's the argy-bargy. As I tell visitors that come to Parliament, that's show time. It's very important, though, it's when the opposition seeks to keep the government to account, but also it is also a showtime. It's where the media, it's where the press are in the gallery, and it's a chance for the government and the opposition to battle each other. But if you come at 9 o'clock on a Tuesday night or 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night, you might actually have only 3 or 4 people in the parliament itself, in the chamber, and they're discussing legislation in a very mature, very collegial manner.
With the media, the news, etc., it focuses very much on question time or if there's a controversial debate. In my 16 years in the parliament, I would say 95% of the bills and changes to laws, etc., that went through that parliament were agreed to by all sides, with a little bit of tinkering here and there. It's those 5%, those contentious issues, that grab all the spotlight. And of course, question time is a bit of theatre. Question time is an opportunity for the opposition to test the government out, to hold them to account. And it's a very important process. And I've been on both sides of it, you know, asking the questions and answering the questions. But that tends to get a lot of focus, where the everyday workings of the parliament, I think, do a fantastic job. Unfortunately, they don't get covered.
The personal toll on members of Parliament and the rapidly changing expectations of members is an issue addressed by some present and former members.
People's expectations have gone through the roof. People have instant expectations now. Because of social media and the diversity of communications, if you make people feel now that you have access to the world pretty much, so you can make your point to the world and you expect the world to respond straight away. And whereas when I started, it was typically I would write a letter to a minister, you know, and that would be deliberated on for a certain amount of time. I'd get a response back, and there may be a further exchange, and that whole process of working through an issue could take 6 months. But now people have an expectation. They come into my electorate office and raise an issue about some agency or some issue they have with government of various sorts, and they want it resolved by the afternoon.
The family commitments for Western Australian MPs, regional WA state MPs and Western Australian federal MPs are beyond what most people would understand.
Being a Member of Parliament is an incredibly demanding position on both you and your family. You're constantly working. I mean, there's no doubt about it. You very seldom can ever shut your mind down and not be thinking about work. There's always more to be done than you physically can do, so you're constantly choosing what are going to be my priorities today, what is it that I can achieve today. The other thing is you're constantly in the spotlight. You know, when you go out, you've got to be on your absolute best behaviour, because people do know who you are and they are watching you.
And every human being is flawed. They have limits to their energy, their intelligence, their willingness to engage in certain actions, you know, their capacities. And if everything rests on their shoulders, it's an impossible burden. But then becomes, I suppose, an expectation that every little wrinkle in the body politic is the subject of a Prime Ministerial or a State Premier's commentary. It shouldn't be. I mean, I hope that many more will learn to step back from that, and the media managers will leave them alone.
Parliament does roll along monolithically, and I think most people would say, well, you know, government acts very slowly and, you know, things don't happen fast enough. But when you think about it, when you're making a change to people's lives, then it has to be well thought through and well debated within the Parliament.